Stop me if you've heard this one before. You're midway through a fight, and the party wizard gets to use their bonus action to move their flaming sphere over an oil slick that they threw from a jar the previous turn, which sets it on fire. That bonus action also lets them hit an enemy, dealing fire damage, and any enemies that end their turn adjacent to that ball are going to also take fire damage. They then use their action to cast Magic Missile, targeting 3 different enemies, automatically hitting a group of them, and overall they've made this huge impact on a fight. Now it's your turn, Mr. Barbarian. You activated your rage 2 turns ago. So what do you do this turn? Well, you attack the enemy you're adjacent to, and then you pass. Hello, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and in today's video we're going to be talking about balance versus symmetry as it relates to tabletop role-playing game design. This is a really meaty subject that I'm really interested to get all of your opinions on, so let's dive in, let's define some terms, and let's use some case studies from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and 5.5 to illustrate some points. All right, let's jump in. So let's define balance. So I'm going to use the term balance to refer to numerical equality among options available to players in a tabletop role-playing game. So like in a game like D&D 5e, you've got several classes to pick from. The classes would be balanced if each of them can contribute significantly to a given scene, that they feel powerful and impactful, that their numbers scale appropriately, that no one option absolutely blows the others out of the water as far as impact goes. It has to do with parity among options on a power scale, specifically. So that's balance. Examples of balance would be trying to take the average damage per round of a fighter at 5th level and compare it to the average damage per round of a rogue at 5th level, just in a normal, straight-up fight. If those numbers look roughly in the same ballpark, those two things may be balanced. Now, of course, a class or set of abilities aren't in isolation, and there's things that, connect to it and can make something more powerful in other areas than in, say, straight combat. But for our purposes, you could compare a damage per round and say, like, okay, these are roughly in line with each other. And 5th edition D&D is okay in that regard. There are some outliers, but it's not too bad as far as balance goes. Of course, the most balanced edition of D&D was 4th edition. And that one, almost all of the classes were extremely evenly balanced when it came to damage per round and impact, of course, excluding some outliers. All right, let's define symmetry. Symmetry is the even availability of options and decisions available to players. So to break that open a little bit more, what I mean is that symmetrical design means that any given character has a similar number of options and abilities available to them. They don't have to work necessarily the same way, but they have a similar level of breadth. So for example, in 5th edition D&D, the spellcasters like wizards, sorcerers, clerics, druids have significantly more breadth of options. The breadth is way wider than, say, a barbarian or a fighter or a rogue. There isn't symmetry in those designs. So these different classes work differently. And there's not even symmetry necessarily among the marshals or the casters. So there's a lot of asymmetrical design there. So again, symmetry, as I'm using it, refers to decision trees and available options to the players. So an example of symmetry, again, we can look at 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, which is an extremely symmetrical system. So much so that all of the classes work basically the same way. So this makes 4th edition D&D the most balanced and symmetrical of all of the editions. Is that good? So I think there's a lot of great things about 4th edition D&D. I played it for years, but it's so symmetrical and so balanced that it became homogeneous. A homogeneous game is one in which none of the options feel all that special, either from a power differential standpoint or a breadth of options standpoint. When everyone is the same, then no one is really all that unique.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
It means that the wizard and the fighter and the rogue and the monk all start blending together a little bit more because they're all using the same structures to use their abilities, symmetry, and balance-wise, all of the options fall pretty evenly within the same bandwidth. Of course, there's some broken builds in 4e, but we'll ignore those. So a homogeneous game can sometimes feel uninteresting, because really, The point of all these games is to have fun, and homogeny in options is the enemy of fun, engaging, and interesting gameplay. Another example we can look at is Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Pathfinder 2e has an immense lack of symmetry. There are myriad subsystems and abilities and features you can find. Classes can work wildly different from one another. There's so much variety there. So it has a very significant lack of symmetry. But it's actually pretty balanced, I'd say. I mean, yeah, you can really dig into the character builds and make some pretty broken stuff, but overall, the underlying mathematics of Pathfinder 2e are very solid. They weren't messing around over there at Paizo when they built the core structure of that game. So yeah, you can make some broken stuff to abuse some subsystems, but if we take it as an aggregate, Pathfinder 2e is an example of a pretty balanced game with very little symmetry, and that's good. I think that's pretty good design. It means that every character has all of these interesting options available to them. You know, it doesn't matter if you're a marshal or a wizard or what have you, there's all sorts of fiddly bits you can sink your teeth into and interesting decisions turn by turn, as well as outside of the game as you develop your character that are available to you. So thumbs up Paizo about Pathfinder 2e. So let's look at some case studies in 5th edition. Let's start with the Rogue. So the Rogue in 5.5 got a really nice facelift. A couple key changes really elevated the class, not from a balance perspective, as the balance was always okay with the Rogue, but from a symmetry perspective. The Rogue now has some branching decisions they can make in their moment-to-moment gameplay, apart from just I hide and I sneak attack. So now, starting at I think level 5, they get to exchange sneak attack dice to do rider effects when they hit something. Like they can disengage for free, they can knock somebody prone, they can poison them. It actually is now giving this forking decision tree on what they can do in their turn, when before, a rogue's turn would be very binary, right? I hide and I sneak attack. If I don't deal sneak attack damage, I just need to get sneak attack. That's everything I need to do. All of the rogue's power and utility was built into that one thing as it relates to its core class, right? Not before layering on subclasses. So now the rogue actually has some fun toys to play with mid-fight that don't take a special resource, they're not once per day. It's just the rogue gets to make interesting decisions moment to moment. So let's also talk about the Monk. So the Monk has always been okay balance-wise. I mean, their damage per round has never been stellar, but in 5.5, they got a nice facelift when it came to their mechanics to break up their decision tree even more, because in 5th edition, the Monk had a lot of action economy restrictions and unintuitive or trap choices. For example, in order to use your bonus action to punch, 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 you had to have taken the attack action with your action. So that meant you couldn't interact with the environment or, in 5th edition, feed somebody a potion and still do punch, punch, punch. It meant you were locked into a certain approach to utilize that feature. And they removed that restriction in 5.5. Additionally, they've taken some of the features like deflect arrows, I think it was what it was called, and just made it deflect attack. So now the Monk can deflect any attack, reducing the incoming damage and potentially redirecting it to somebody else. So now this is giving the Monk more decisions to make turn by turn and more frequently, as you're not shot by an arrow all that frequently. And when it did come up in 5th edition, it was nice to be able to deflect it, but now, anytime you want to use it, if you're hit by an attack, you can reduce that incoming damage. And that's really nice. So the Monk has been broken up a little bit in a good way. It's now easier to play, and there's less hurdles and action economy calculus that needs to go on to play it properly. So overall, the Monk has a decent amount of asymmetry here from other marshals. It's got its own system here with its focus points, not key points anymore. So overall, the Monk has a lot of decisions they get to make moment by moment in a fight. Now, my beloved Barbarian is having a tough time. So the Barbarian has never had a balance problem in 5th edition, nor in 5.5. It's been very good at certain things, it's very tanky, and in 5th edition you could do the Great Weapon Master route with Reckless Attack, it hit very hard. All of that was fine from a balance standpoint, but it also wasn't all that interesting. The Barbarian rarely had any interesting choices it could make on its turn, apart from you rage at the start, and then you just smack things with your basic attacks, Reckless Attacking, every time, and Great Weapon Mastering every time. So in 5.5, they cleaned up rage a little bit, making it easier to maintain, but until level 13, the Barbarian is still just basic attacking every turn. Again, part of their core kit, before layering on any subclasses or feats or anything like that. Now, the Barbarian simply they rage and they attack once or twice if they're 5th level or higher. And that's really it. There's no branching decision trees for the Barbarian to make, no resources to manage. It's really just rage, run into the fight, stand there and swing your sword. And they didn't gain any new features to alleviate that before level 13. At level 13, they get their Brutal Strikes feature, which lets them deal extra damage instead of gaining advantage when they Reckless Strike. But you can trade it in for some pushes, some shoves, that kind of thing. It's okay, but it doesn't come online till level 13. So most people don't even play till that high level. So the whole time leading up to it, the Barbarian is just basic attacking. Now, that's, again, not to say that the Barbarian was underpowered or is underpowered in 5.5. I'm playing a level 5 Barbarian in a 5.5 game. Power-wise, I feel fine. Again, not to say that the Barbarian is weak. I'm saying that it's uninteresting mechanically. And that's where the symmetry comes in. The Barbarian is so flat and so not unique in its systems that playing it feels almost like autopilot. There's rarely any interesting tactical decisions to be made based on the features of the Barbarian class. You can still make tactical decisions in a fight, sure, in complex fights you can, triage or attempt to determine what the biggest threat enemy is, but everybody can do that. The Barbarian isn't given special features that give them a toolkit to handle different situations in a fight. Really, they just get angry and swing sword as their core structure. While other classes, even martials, have been given more interesting decisions to be made on a moment-to-moment basis. Here's another case study for us to examine. Great Weapon Master from 5th edition versus 5.5. No doubt about it, no argument, Great Weapon Master in 5th edition was not balanced. It represented a huge damage increase for its cost, a cost of which you could overcome fairly easily in certain classes, and it represented an outlier in damage output among physical attackers, among the martials. So it definitely makes sense to make that more balanced. So now, in 5.5, Great Weapon Master just increases your damage by an amount equal to your proficiency bonus when using a heavy weapon. That is way more balanced. It's still useful, it's still powerful, it's still a good pick, but it's a lot less interesting. So now it's just always on. You just always deal this extra damage. And before, Great Weapon Master represented one of the few options that was available to basic martials, where they could try to optimize something on their turn, where they could balance the thought of, okay, that enemy is in plate armor and has a shield, maybe I won't go for the Great Weapon Master power attack swing, maybe I'll just do a basic swing because I don't think I can hit. It gave you an option that added a decision on your turns, and one of the few ones available to a Barbarian that actually made sense to take. And they've removed that now. Great Weapon Master is effectively just passive. It's always on as far as its damage increase goes. So that was a lot of ranting about 5th edition, and again, I love Dungeons & Dragons. I play so much 5th edition, now 5.5. I definitely really enjoy it, but some of the design decisions do drive me a little crazy. So when you look at the base classes for all the different classes in the game, ignore their subclasses for the moment. Take a look at what sort of decisions and choices the player gets to make on a turn-by-turn basis. Again, barring magic items and feats and all that other stuff, just look at what the core features are and when the classes get them. And you'll notice that the Barbarian has almost nothing it does that isn't passive. And entering a rage is effectively passive. You do it at the start of a fight, and it lasts the whole fight. And it's almost never a choice, do I rage or not? That calculation's usually pretty easy, and it isn't something you interact with after that first turn. As soon as you roll initiative and your turn comes up, you rage or you don't, and the decision is done. So the Barbarian is this outlier when it comes to decisions they get to make and options available to them in their core class. So I want to try this thought experiment. This isn't going to be a serious design idea that I'm going to present to you all today, but just sort of a fun thought I've been having about a redesign to the core Barbarian experience. Okay, stick with me here. It's going to be kind of weird, and let's workshop it a bit. So the fiction I'm imagining for a Barbarian is somebody that gets angrier and angrier the longer the fight goes on. The more damage they take, the more their allies are hurt, the more things get dire, the more the Barbarian rises to that occasion, and that they'd actually be fueled by anger and their rage in a more evocative way, in a way that actually lets them decide things on a moment-by-moment basis. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to completely change the way rage works. Here's my suggestion. What if instead of a bonus action to become raged, instead the barbarian gains rage like a meter, like maybe you've seen in some video games, during a fight? So let's say that the maximum you can have is always going to align with a dice. So maybe at level 1, your rage can go up to 6, measured on a d6. And this rage represents a resource that you then spend in a fight to activate certain abilities, to reduce incoming damage, to do cool stuff. And maybe, I don't know, when you roll initiative, you roll your rage die, and that's how much rage you start with. So you'd roll a d6 and have that much rage. And let's say you also gain rage whenever you get hit, or whenever an ally gets reduced to 0 hit points, or whenever you kill an enemy. Let's say there are these various ways that start increasing that rage number up to its maximum. And I don't know what the balance on the numbers of that would be. Like if you get hit, it's 1 rage, but if you get hit then with an amount more than your rage die, it's 2 rage. I don't know. We don't need to worry about the specific numbers here yet. All we need is that it starts to accumulate as the fight goes on. And you start with a little bit of it. Now let's say by default you have a few ways to spend this rage, to take that fuel of anger inside of you and do something with it. Like, I don't know, maybe you can spend 1 rage to gain advantage on your next melee attack. Maybe you can expend 1 rage when you hit to add an extra damage equal to your rage die. So like a d6 at first, and maybe that scales up to a d8 and a d10 and a d12. Or maybe you can do cool stuff like spend an amount of rage to pick up something big and heavy and throw it for a big hit of damage. Not some weak improvised weapon damage, but like a legit big, boom, pick up a cart and throw it, pick up a boulder and throw it at somebody by expending this rage. And now you start to see how you could have interesting decisions to be made turn by turn. You'd be balancing expending your rage to do extra damage, do extra features, based on how much is incoming. The more you get hurt, the more things go wrong, the more of this feature you have. And, maybe, I don't know, you take less damage based on the amount of rage you currently have, so the barbarian gets to actually determine a difference between defensive and offensive play. Do they hoard the rage to make themselves harder to hurt, or do they expend it to kill things faster? You're starting to actually be able to make some tactical choices there about your playstyle. And what's really cool about that setup, instead of rage being something you activate, I get angry, it's something you become over the course of a fight. You get angrier and angrier the more you're hurt. It's that classic example of all the crossbow bolts and arrows going into the barbarian, and he just gets more and more pissed off, and that the enemies would maybe be afraid to hurt the barbarian too much because of the fury he will unleash. We'd be getting rid of reckless attacks as it currently exists with this new structure, because what reckless attacks does for the barbarian is it's supposed to replicate the idea that the barbarian fights recklessly, right? They're able to throw themselves into the fight and makes them more deadly, but they leave themselves open. That's fine from a mechanic standpoint, like balance-wise, but wouldn't it be cooler if instead the barbarian is rewarded for playing recklessly, rather than having a switch they turn on to make themselves more vulnerable? So if they gain more rage the more damage they take, that means that playing more recklessly gives them more rage. So throwing themselves into the thick of the fight, putting themselves between the dragon and their friends, means the barbarian is going to be gaining more rage and therefore become more powerful, rewarding that more barbarian-like gameplay from a meta standpoint. And of course, you could rebalance subclasses to connect to this sort of structure where, the animal barbarian, right? You could spend rage to activate your increased tankiness for bear totem, or, give your allies advantage by spending rage for the wolf totem, whatever. You could start connecting other things to it. Like I said, this isn't a complete concept, but imagine a situation where the barbarian has a unique resource to them, a unique system that represents what truly does make them unique, their rage. And instead of that rage simply being a stance they toggle on, it is something they interact with every turn, rather than something they switch on at the start of the fight and forget about. So I don't know what the balance of that structure would look like. It would take some ironing out to actually make the numbers make sense and make sure it doesn't blow up the balance too much of the barbarian, but the key there is it makes the barbarian interesting to play. And if people watching this video, if you think this is a cool idea and you'd like to see me actually do a full conversion of the barbarian into this rage point version, let me know down in the comments. If it gets some traction, I'll do a write-up of one and throw it online for free for everybody, because I really like the Barbarian and I play it a lot, but I feel like compared to all my friends and their classes that they play, I just don't have a lot of mechanically interesting decisions to make turn by turn, and I'm trying to fix that. So that was kind of a long-winded rant about barbarians in general and about balance and symmetry, but I hope you all found that useful. I try to keep these sort of things in mind as I'm working on my games, like in Tales from Elsewhere. Because in Tales from Elsewhere, the core balance of the game is very flat, and it's meant to be. There's not supposed to be extreme outliers. And the game is actually moderately symmetrical in that all of the characters have access to a similar set of decisions. But because all of those decisions are interesting, it doesn't make the characters feel too repetitive with one another. They don't overlap as much, because all of these features you can layer on top of your core system can pull you and push you in different directions and give you more interesting things to do. But because Tales from Elsewhere games are a lower fantasy level, you're not going to see huge spikes in one direction or another. There's not going to be one character that can do such incredibly amazing and powerful things that transcend humanity while another one can't. It's just not that balance we're going to see, and not that amount of asymmetry. But I still think that we've accomplished something where each player can give themselves interesting decisions, and there's a myriad interesting options available to them in the core system. So thanks everybody for watching. If you made it this far, as always, please do like, subscribe, share this video, and get down in the comments and let me know what your thoughts are on balance, symmetry, and about my hypothetical Barbarian rework. I'm super active in the comments, definitely come hang out. And if you want to discuss game design with us more, come on into the Tales from Elsewhere Discord. We're very active in there, talking about not only Tales from Elsewhere, but game design in general. So come hang out and let's discuss it. All right, thanks again everybody, and hope to catch you on the next video.